Welcome to Echoes from the Satellite. I'm Karen. Recently, I got hold of this book, which is Arthur C. Clarke's The Lost Worlds of 2001. As a fan of 2001: A Space Odyssey, I was pretty intrigued by this find. It's kind of a slim paperback, uh, but it has not only some stories that could have been the basis for 2001, but weren't. It also has some of Arthur C. Clarke's notes about working on 2001: A Space Odyssey. And so I was happy to be able to dig into this. And so, what I'd like to do today, I want to talk a little bit about how 2001 came to be, the film, but also talk about what this alternative version of 2001 might have been. Putting that film together was something of a struggle. What we got was very different from some of the initial plans. And so I want to take a look at this book and also the process that brought about not only this, but the novel of 2001: A Space Odyssey. So let's talk a little bit about Arthur C. Clarke and who he was. Arthur C. Clarke was born in 1916 in Somerset, England. He was always interested in science and particularly astronomy. He served in World War II. He was part of a team that developed early warning radar to detect, planes coming into England. After the war, he earned degrees in math and physics from King's College. He's credited with the idea of using geostationary satellites for telecommunications. He began publishing science fiction in 1937 in magazines like Astounding Science Fiction, and he became a full-time science fiction author in 1951. One of his most famous works, Childhood's End, was published in 1953. Around about 1956, he moved to Sri Lanka, where he lived the rest of his life. He was very fond of skin diving and actually had a company with another fellow where they filmed movies about skin diving and things like that. So kind of an eclectic guy. After he wrote 2001, he wrote 3 sequels to 2001. And in 1985, he was made a Grand Master of Science Fiction by the Science Fiction Writers of America. Now, Stanley Kubrick, the director of 2001, by the time that, and it was around 1964 or so when he approached Arthur C. Clarke, he was already a very successful director at this point of time. Even though he was only in his mid-30s, he had directed films like Paths of Glory, Spartacus, Lolita, and Dr. Strangelove. And so he was just coming off of Dr. Strangelove and decided that he wanted to make, quote unquote, a really good science fiction film. And so he went to his friend Roger Karras, who was a film publicist, and he was saying, well, I want to make a quality science fiction film. Who is a good science fiction writer that I should approach? Roger Karras was also friends with Arthur C. Clarke. And so he said, well, you've got to talk to Arthur C. Clarke. And so, this is how these two men were brought together. And so Kubrick initiated this communication. He wrote him a letter, and what Kubrick specified, there were 3 things that he was interested in putting this film together. He said he wanted to explore, first, the reasons for believing in extraterrestrial life. Secondly, the impact that discovering extraterrestrial life would make on humanity. And then the third thing, which to me sounds much more like a visual thing, he wanted to have a space probe with a landing and exploration of both the moon and Mars. So these initial communications went back and forth between Kubrick and Clarke in letter form. Clarke being, very excited that this director was interested in filming something. And he had certain books of his or stories of his that, he was um, interested in getting filmed. And Childhood's End was the one he said, well, I think this is the one you should film because it has this alien encounter, and this would be a really good one for you to adapt. But then very quickly he pivoted to a different story of his, and he realized, oh, maybe the Sentinel would be a better one for Kubrick to look at. Now, the Sentinel is a short story. It's only about 9 pages long. He wrote it originally in 1948, and he wrote this for a competition that the BBC was holding for short stories, and he didn't place in this competition. But then he later got it published in 1951 in a magazine called Ten Story Fantasy. So it's been published in a lot of other places since then. I know I read it originally in this book called Expedition to Earth, which is a collection of Arthur C. Clarke's short stories. And so it's also published in The Lost Worlds of Arthur C. Clarke. So The Sentinel, and many of you may know this, the Sentinel is a short story wherein an astronaut on the moon discovers a structure, and it's essentially like a pyramid that's built on the moon, and it's built out of some sort of like crystalline material, and it's clearly something that has been built. It's not a natural structure, but it's also impossible that human beings would have built it because of where it's found. And so they realize, oh, this is an alien structure that's on the moon, and it's been here, for millions of years. It also has a force field around it. And the human beings try to get through the force field. They wind up using atomic power, and it destroys not only the force field, but it destroys the structure itself. And then it's postulated that it's shut off this signal that it may have been sending out to its creators. And so then the thought is, oh, this will indicate to whoever created it that, intelligent life now exists on this planet, and maybe they will come back. And so the idea was that, oh, this would be a good basis for something in the film. A lot of people say, oh, that, 2001 is based on this short story. Apparently, this irritated Arthur Clarke, and he later on made a comment that he said, quote, "It bears about as much relation to the movie as an acorn to the resultant full-grown oak." So while it did have some bearing on the film, and obviously the monolith is like the pyramid, many things changed in the course of putting the story together for 2001. So Kubrick and Clarke developed this collaborative relationship, which was not always easy. They struggle with each other, as very creative people will. And I will suggest, if you are interested in this relationship, I have another book here, which I found absolutely fascinating. I read this a couple of years ago. This is Space Odyssey by Michael Benson. And this is a relatively thick book, but Benson gets into all of the details about how 2001 was made, how Kubrick and Clarke worked together, also bringing in all of the other folks who worked on the film in special effects and cinematography and so forth. So highly recommend this book if you're a fan of 2001. So, as I said, they started trying to figure out, how they were going to tell a story, bringing in those three elements that Clarke was really focused on. And initially, Kubrick wanted to write the novel first, which is not how things are done in Hollywood. Typically, you write a screenplay first, you make the film, and then there's a novelization. But he said, well, let's write a novel first, and then we can develop a screenplay from that. And so Clarke went off and started writing a novel, but then Kubrick began doing work. And essentially, what happened is they began uh, sort of doing this simultaneous thing where they were doing the screenplay and the novel at the same time. And there were a lot of frustrations around that, I think, for more for Clarke than for Kubrick. Um, you know, Clarke had sent Kubrick a number of short stories that he had written for Kubrick to sort of pick through and take elements from. At the beginning, Kubrick wanted to call the film Journey Beyond the Stars, which Clarke hated that title. And then by, I think it was April 1965, Kubrick settled on the title of 2001: A Space Odyssey. And they constantly brainstormed about different concepts in the film. Some of the things that they struggled on were, how would they show the aliens? What would they look like? How could they depict them such that they wouldn't be, humorous or goofy? They had an idea, what if they were machines? Another idea was, what if the ETs were stranded on Earth in the prehistoric times, and the ape men had to essentially help them get off the earth. So there were all these different concepts that they were struggling with and trying to incorporate and figure out which ones were the best ones. And I think this is sort of where the Lost Worlds of Arthur C. Clarke or Lost Worlds of 2001 comes into play. So in reading this, there are a number of stories in here which essentially tell sort of an alternate 2001. And it's fascinating because it's in many ways the same story, but it's told completely in a different fashion. So in this version, we see the aliens on Earth influencing the development of the proto-humans, actually teaching them to hunt. So there's like these 7-foot tall humanoids. And you think about that, that's probably not filmable, right? Who are you going to get? You'd probably have to get somebody like Richard Keel, who played Jaws in the 007 films. And it's probably going to look goofy, right? So it was probably a better decision to go with the monolith showing up and somehow influencing humankind, right? Then we have many chapters in here which are spent with the astronauts, either on Earth or in the space station, preparing for the mission. So you're kind of getting to know, I think it's all 5 or 6 of the astronauts. So you get to know the ones in hibernation too. And again, I think there is a reason we don't spend a lot of time with the astronauts in the film. And I'll talk about that maybe later, but you spend a lot of time with these astronauts, you get to know them, and it just seems almost excessive. And learning about the mission, going to museums, there's just a lot of stuff that goes on that seems extraneous. There's no Hal in this storyline per se. There were 2 different versions that Clarke wrote about. One was a robot named Socrates that would accompany them. And then he sort of came up with another draft where there would be a computer on board named Athena, who would have more of a female character. But in neither case were these entities sort of sabotaging things. They were, just there to be helpful. So we don't have that element of this computer being that is, betraying the astronauts. Also interesting in this is that we don't have the monolith. So when they go out to Jupiter, they go to Jupiter in this, I know in the novelization it's Saturn, but the Stargate is not a monolith. The Stargate is actually a shaft that has been mined into a moon. And so they have to go into this shaft. And as Bowman is going into the shaft in one of the pods, he says, "Oh, it's full of stars." So you still get that expression of "it's full of stars," which I think was only in 2010, the film. I don't think was actually in 2001. And then when he goes through the Stargate, he goes in and he meets the aliens again. And he actually meets that 7 foot tall alien that was on Earth. That alien is still alive. And he's like seeing this guy and, oh, he's what's evolved from those humans those proto-humans that I influenced. So honestly, I don't know that any of that would have worked. And Clarke doesn't come up with a real chapter to end things. And he said that that was one of the things they struggled with. They had a really hard time figuring out, how to end the film, right? But I think now most people think the way they did end it works. Although I know people do complain about the ending. It's like, well, what's going on in the rooms? Why is he getting older? What does he turn into the star child? I know my own father, the first time we saw 2001, it was when it came on TV. I was pretty small, so I wasn't paying a lot of attention. But I remember my dad, when the movie ended, my dad was a very practical guy. And when the film ended, he's like, "So that's it? What am I supposed to make of that?" He was not too happy with the ending. And I think a lot of people feel that way. But I think any other way of trying to like show the aliens at the end would have been difficult. I think that's one of the things I think about 2001 that makes it a movie that people go back to, or makes it a movie that stands the test of time, is that it has a mystery to it, right? And when we're thinking about this film and the two men who are really responsible for it, and I'm not dissing any of the special effects artists because clearly that was also very key to its success. But conceptually, you have Kubrick, who is the director, who's a very visual guy, and I think was dealing in a lot of ways on subconscious themes. Then you have Clarke, who is a writer, so he's dealing with language, and he has to be very clear in the book what he's talking about. So the film leaves things very mysterious, and the viewer is going to feel it on a visceral level, and also has to maybe imagine or fill things in. But when you're reading a book, you still imagine things, but Clarke does a lot of work clarifying what's going on, and it kind of takes away from the mystery. So my big takeaway with this is, if you are a fan of 2001, I would definitely say, if you can get a hold of this book, if you see it like I did in a used bookshop, pick it up, because it's a really interesting sort of alternate universe version of 2001. And I think it'll be fun for you to explore it. Now, I will say I was lucky. I saw it in a used bookstore for like $3 and picked it up. I looked online, and I think the cheapest version I saw somewhere was about $9 or $10. So it may not be the easiest thing to find, but again, if you're a fan of 2001, if you've read the book and watched the movie a zillion times, this will be a great alternate journey for you to take with 2001. And I, again, will also give a big plug to Michael Benson's book, because I think understanding a lot of the insanity that went on in filming this will explain, why certain things were done the way they were done. So that is my take on The Lost Worlds of 2001. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd love to hear anybody's thoughts. If you've read the book, or if you're just interested in 2001, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. I know that people seem pretty polarized around 2001, but for me personally, I think if we don't have 2001, we don't have Star Wars. We don't have a lot of things that came after it. So yeah, it's right up there in my top 5 science fiction films. and definitely hope that you all enjoyed this look. So anyway, hope you all are staying cool this summer. Please drop a comment, subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and I will see you again real soon.